Oh boy, an adventure action RPG game with attention to the game's difficulty. Alrighty then. Huh? What's that? Huh? What? Okay, fine. I'll go deposit some items and come back for you. Wait, huh? Where'd it go? What's up, old man? Can you fix my sword? No can do. What? Why not? You don't even have any souls, bruh. Patience and persistence are the providers of progress. What makes Demon's Souls a game that draws in the player through constant hardships and difficulty? Why should I keep playing the game that puts me back at the beginning and takes away any advancements I have made thus far? Welcome to Appreciation Review Critique, where I take a game and decide whether it's worth the time and energy investment. Developed by FromSoftware and interestingly enough released by 3 different publishers. First published by Sony Computer Entertainment for our Japanese player markets. Due to its level of difficulty, Sony decided not to publish the game outside of Japan, in fears of players thinking it's too hard, thus not selling very well. It already was considered a failure before it even released in Japan, so our corporate overlords at Sony decided it wasn't a worthwhile investment to even think of releasing it anywhere else. Soon after its release in Japan, a fan player base was formed around the game. People loved the game, and it started selling more because people talked about its uniqueness and challenging factor. It makes you wonder how Sony, behind the almighty PlayStation, couldn't see how this game could have been more if it was greatly supported by Sony. Obviously, they learned from their mistakes as they are releasing the PlayStation 5 with a brand spanking new Demon's Souls remake. Well, originally, during the game's development, it actually didn't have a clear vision for Demon's Souls on the PlayStation 3. That is, until Hidetaka Miyazaki managed to take over its development. He figured since the game is lacking in vision and already considered a pointless time and money investment, he will take it upon himself to create something of his own design. Thus, one of the most successful and iconic video game franchises was born. Gameplay. We have 5 key criteria on which the difficulty level is judged. We want any player to be able to clear any obstacle simply by learning from mistakes and paying close attention. Then, the reasons for failure must always be clear and understandable. Every problem must have multiple solutions, so that players can tackle it whichever way they want. The game's controls can never be a factor from which difficulty is derived. And finally, we want to make sure that there's the possibilities for miracles to happen, those magical moments that spread stories outside of the confines of the game's world. Our game in question is an action role-playing game set in the kingdom of Boletaria, a once thriving kingdom now reduced to mindless soul-craving beings that attack anyone who still seems to possess their sanity. The gameplay consists of quick, normal attacks, slow, more stamina-depleting stronger attacks, shielding, and the occasional item or magic miracle usage. We have a large number of weapons to choose from, with each weapon consisting of different attack animations, power output, and appearance to best suit the player's gameplay style. Personally, on my playthrough, I ended up using the Uchigatana, which is a powerful katana that does a great amount of damage as well as cause a bleeding effect on the opposing force. I'm sure there is a better, more powerful weapon in the game, but I haven't bothered to look for it, as the Uchigatana has allowed me to clear the game just fine. Other weapons that the player has access to are daggers. These have a short range and low damage, but use less of your stamina meter, while also providing multiple swings through lighter attacks. Straight swords are the ordinary weapon type that provides the player with a balance of slashing and thrusting attacks. Large swords are weapons that deal large amounts of damage but consume more stamina and are typically held with 2 hands, but are very slow, which leaves the player open for quick enemy attacks. Curved swords are similar to the straight swords, but offer a bleeding effect on the enemy, as well as offer an extra damage. Katanas, which I stated before, are pretty powerful and can be held with one hand. The only catch is you have to repair them frequently, as they lose their sharpness far quicker than those typical straight swords the player has access to. Thrusting swords are those weapon types that specialize in the thrusting motion, which allows the player to cover areas with narrow hallways where other weapons might get stuck hitting a wall before they hit an enemy. Axes have a wide range of attack, capable of getting the player out of a situation where you are being overwhelmed by a horde of enemies, as well as deal large sums of damage. Hammers have the ability to hurt enemies that may have a higher defense, such as having their shields up or just straight up having a good armor set, like the knights for example. These are much lighter weapons that don't take up too much of a burden on your character's weight limit, and I'll talk about that more in detail soon. Fist weapons are exactly what it sounds like. They are essentially like wearing brass knuckles, which is perfect for players that just disregard even using a sharp bladed weapon altogether, which I haven't done myself yet, but sounds like an interesting experience. Spears are similar to the thrusting swords in the way that they specialize in the forward poking movement into the enemy. These work better against enemies that wear armor, but they are easy for the enemy to parry, leaving you exposed for a counterattack. Pole arms are once again identical as spears, but offer the ability to damage multiple enemies at once. I prefer these over the spears myself. Bows require the player to be holding arrows to be able to use them. Obviously, they give the player the ability to get a better aim using a closer first-person perspective, but leaves the player vulnerable for attacks on every angle. Crossbows are kindred to that of the bow, but this is more for quick, locked-on assaults, and it doesn't offer the first-person view that the bow does. Last but not least, we have the Catalyst and the Talismans. The Catalyst allows the player to use Soul's magic, which does come in handy because the magic is really useful in the game. Talismans, on the other hand, give the player the ability to use miracles. In this game, miracles are the opposite of that of magic, as this is in a way magic, but from God. Both deplete your magic meter after use. We also have two shield types. One is the parry type of shield that allows just that, parry. Parrying grants a counterattack at the enemy, which does a large amount of damage just as attacking them from behind. Bash shields are far larger that protect the user from bigger blows, which focus on depleting your stamina more so than your health. You can bash forward, pushing the enemies back, giving you a chance to follow up with whatever attack you so desire. If I haven't lost you already after that lengthy description of every type of weapon, let me add the fact that you can't outright use a weapon if you are lacking in your specific stat requirements for that weapon. Now that we are done talking about all that nerd stuff, let's start talking about the real meat of the gameplay. The base of operations for the player is known as the Nexus. This is where you come to deposit or withdraw any weapons or armor where Stockpile Thomas resides. Purchase miracles or spells at either of the merchants standing on opposite sides of the Nexus. Fix or upgrade armor or weapons using the help of Blacksmith Ed, or as stated earlier, you can find the Maiden in Black chillin' at a random location waiting for the player to return with souls to be leveled up. Later as the game progresses, you can find newer NPCs that offer new magic or optional quest lines. The game is composed of 5 different Archstones that essentially make up everything that Demon Souls has to offer. World 1, Archstone of the Small King, has the most areas, as this is the kingdom that holds the False King, with his faithful knights guarding him even after the souls have been devoured, leaving their demonic forms in place. World 2, Archstone of the Burrow King, is an old mining depot for the kingdom, full of mindless workers that still continue to mine at the tunnels. These tunnels eventually lead into the underground caves where the Dragon God resides, waiting for the player to take it on. World 3, Archstone of the Tower Queen, is a neighboring old kingdom that has been converted into a prison for all of its inhabitants, with a king ruling over as his madness takes him over through a sentient-like golden garb. World 4, Archstone of the Shadow Man, is an isolated land where pagans would go worship the dead and fallen heroes. Once the fog set in, the souls of the dead possess the skeleton bodies that are scattered throughout the area. This is where the Storm King can be found, which is an embodiment of the ancient civilization that accepts sacrifice of those worthy enough. Last but not least, World 5, the Valley of Defilement, is a dumping ground for the citizens of Boletaria that have been abused or neglected. This is where the Saint Austria can be found tending to the poor and unwanted community with her guard, Garl Vinland, at her side. Now, due to possible time or money constraints, there originally was going to be a 6th world that took place in the Northern Limit, which is a snowy type of environment full of snake, werewolf, and other types of enemies specific for that location. But unfortunately, it was cut out before release. Lore-wise, at the moment, this 6th Archstone was destroyed due to the fog completely taking over the area, and thus breaking it sealed off that area to the player. But some smarter than me people on YouTube have managed to dig deep into the game's files to discover more about this area. Someone actually made the area not playable, but able to wander about and explore what was created before it was cut out. And there was surprisingly a lot of content still there, which would have been really fun to play in, but I'm sure it'll be included in Demon's Souls Remake for the PlayStation 5 as a way to entice old Demon's Souls players into returning to this fog-infested, soul-deprived, tragedy-stricken land, Lamau. Essentially, in incredible simple terms, the game looks like this. Nexus is at the center of the game, allowing you to pick the level that you decide to enter into, similar to how Mega Man 2 lets you decide what level you want to play in whatever order you choose. The levels themselves have a long path to the boss room. Within the path itself is made up of hidden paths, shortcuts, useful items to find, and hazards such as enemies or traps. If you can make it through all of that in one piece, you are granted with a pristine chance of taking on the sub-area boss. If you manage to defeat the boss, you are granted with a checkpoint that serves as a starting point for the next path and boss. But if you meet your unfortunate demise either along the path or at the boss battle itself, you'll be granted to the starting point of the sub-area. If that happens, all the enemies within the area that you had previously defeated get spawned back in, forcing the player to overcome the same challenges once again. If it wasn't challenging enough, you also lose any souls that you have accumulated thus far, but you are granted the opportunity to reclaim said lost souls if you traverse back to the area previously defeated at. But there is a catch to that. If you meet your demise before you reach your dropped souls, then you lose those souls forever. You could say it's sort of a trial and error, but if the player is cautious, patient, and diligent, then you are able to traverse these areas as a newcomer to the series very well. Hardcore players that have hours on top of hours in this game can easily parkour and maneuver around the enemies just to get to the boss quite easily, as their knowledge over the game serves them well on multiple playthroughs. It's a very hard game indeed, and I've only played Dark Souls 1 and 2 in its entirety, and consider this title to be more difficult than those games. When it comes to these kinds of games, the more knowledge the player knows about the game, the more rewarding the gameplay becomes. Bosses. The main appeal to these games by now have definitely established their roots with this title. Each boss is unique, offering different challenging factors to each fight. For example, the first boss in the game, Felonax, is surrounded by many smaller enemies found throughout this level. They guard it using their bodies, if that's even what you want to call whatever they are, and use spears to jab at you if you get near it. But if you slowly take them out, eventually the boss itself is powerless and can't do any sort of harm towards the player, leaving it open for whatever attacks at your disposal to take it out. Or for a much more challenging example, the Man-Eater boss fight. Right as you walk into the boss arena, you are granted with a chimera that runs directly at you. At this point, it has a few different attacks that it can damage you with. At the same time, there is an invisible counter in the background that gives you 60 seconds to either take out the chimera or hurt him as much as possible, because once that minute runs out, a second chimera shows up and they both attack you at the same time. At this point, it's safer to wait till they are separated and then attack them separately. I watched a few videos on this platform that demonstrate how others were able to defeat it. Others used different tactics and strategies to beat him, which brings us back to that delicious design philosophy. Every problem has multiple solutions. There isn't really a correct way to go about these bosses. The player can go about the enemies and routes any way they see fit with the weapons and items that they find. We do have a few faults in the game that I would like to mention here. As I mentioned earlier, during the stats, the player is given a equipment burden number, where if you go over the limit, the player is incapable of rolling and running, but walking is still there, but renders doing anything pointless. Also added to that, there is an item burden, which is similar to the equipment burden, but this one really sucks, and this is the only time I'm going to bring up Dark Souls. Dark Souls allows you to carry an endless amount of items with absolutely no repercussions whatsoever. Definitely spoiled me, because in Demon Souls, if you exceed this limit, you are no longer able to pick up any other items that you find on the ground. Now the issue with that is, if you find a weapon or armor set anywhere, and you attempt to pick it up, it'll automatically drop it. Now if you are a smart player, you'll drop any duplicated items you may have picked up, or items you don't really need. But if you're like me on my first playthrough, you'll pick up a cool armor set only to realize you're already at your limit. Thus, the only way to keep what you have is to go back to Stockpile Thomas and deposit some heavy items, most likely your current armor set that you're wearing. Afterwards, you run back to the spot where you originally picked up the brand new armor set, only to realize that it's gone, no longer there. Well, if you leave the area or you lose your life due to unfortunate circumstances and come back, it'll disappear, only for it to be obtainable once again on a new playthrough or New Game Plus. I'm gonna admit I've attempted to play this game once before, directly after I finished Dark Souls in fact, and once I realized I wasn't able to carry an endless amount of items, I honestly dropped the game, and I didn't come back to it until recently. At that moment, it honestly felt like a game breaker and had no motivation to continue or start over. But as I picked up the game to make this review, I delved into it with a brand new mindset. I realized that this game is completely separate from Dark Souls, and I should probably see the game for what it is instead of comparing it to Dark Souls every 2 seconds. It is difficult to even do that because they are incredibly similar. For my first 40 hours into the game, I kept calling it Dark Souls every time I brought up the game to other people. As most games of its time, this title has a weird morality system that really doesn't make any sense unless you look it up, and even then I still don't get it. Took me probably my entire playthrough to even bother understanding it, and from what I come to know, if you are just evil and take out certain NPCs in human form, it'll turn your world tendency black, which is displayed in your start menu. At this point, Mephistopheles, another NPC character, spawns into the Nexus and gives you assassination quests towards particular characters, and if you follow through with them, she rewards you with items and magic spells you typically can't acquire otherwise. In order to turn this said world tendency white, you basically have to play the game as one typically does and deal with the bosses and side enemies such as dragons or mini bosses, like the Vanguard demon for example from the Shrine of Storms. There is also a mini player tendency that is displayed within the same menu screen that brightens up or darkens up depending on how much of a helpful or evil player you are online. The online servers originally were meant to last till 2011, but due to the game's unexpected success, they had them online till 2018. But sadly, I never got to experience the online multiplayer as the servers have been shut down as of the making of this video. I am aware that some fans of the game have sprung up their own servers for the multiplayer aspect of this game, but I'm not really interested in going out of my way or the game's original intentional way of going about the online portion. The world tendency as well as the player's individual morality unlocks secret, special paths, items, and NPCs that you can access for additional content. I've personally spent about 80 plus hours in the game, which is about the average time I spend on really good games I enjoy, and have not really attempted any of the tendency content. Now I'm not entirely sure what causes this, or it's probably in what I'm about to say, but during my rush through the boss, if I meet my unfortunate demise enough, a few random enemies spawn in that glow bright red, clearly showcasing the fact that they are tougher than traditional enemies in the stage. As if the game wasn't hard enough already, if you are struggling, they add additional enemies along the path to the boss to make it even more challenging. I'm not sure exactly what causes this, but damn bro, chill. Sound design. When it comes to the music of video games, whatever stands out to me and feels memorable, that's what I believe to be worthy enough to mention in this section of my videos. If it stands out enough to me to jam out loud in my car, then it's good shit. This game hardly has any music. Most of the game is just dead silent aside from the noises your character, enemies, and the environment make. The only time you actually hear music is the intro cinematic, boss battles, and the ending credits. One boss battle song actually stood out to me above anything else in the game, and that's the Maiden of Austria's theme. It displays a theme of sadness and tragedy. She is of pure intent, helping those rejected into the Valley of Defilement. Due to her possessing a demon soul, the player has no choice but to defeat her. Although it isn't quite clear on the first playthrough, or if you haven't read the lore for the game, the tragic feel that the developers were trying to display. The music still provides a dreadful feel into what is transpiring as the player walks in to defeat both Hergard Garl Vinland and the Maiden Austria. From what I could find, the game's composer Shunsuke Kida only worked on Demon Souls and a few Japanese TV shows thus far. This was the only video game he has ever worked on as of currently 2020. He did create a calm, soothing ending credits called Return to Slumber, which I would say is a very fitting way to end a game that gives the player a feeling of accomplishment and ease. And if you're like me, we'll continue the game on New Game Plus for another round of getting my ass kicked. Kokia has worked on many things in her life, including the second opening to Gunslinger Girl, an underrated anime that I've watched quite some time ago. She was in charge of the vocals / chorus in the game, the intro cinematic that introduces the player to the world and how it came to be, where she shows off her talent to give the game the drastic, eerie feel right before the player is dropped into this mess of a world. As the game ends, the song I mentioned earlier, Return to Slumber, composed by Shunsuke Kida, has her very vocals as well. We get both the dire sensation the game will provide us before we begin the game, as well as a fitting calm end to the madness in the ending credits. When it comes to Demon Souls and Dark Souls, the voice acting is always superb, one of my favorite aspects of these games. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce her last name, but Yvetta, the voice you hear most in the game, as she is the Maiden in Black.
Soul of the mind, key to life's ether. Soul of the lost, withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended. So the world might be mended.
Provides a memorable job as you hear her voice every time you level up. Typically, hearing the same dialogue can really annoy some players, but her calm voice and accent brings the character to life. It was memorable enough that they hired her back for the role of the plain doll from Bloodborne. Peter Marinker has done some work around the Dark Souls games. He has done Kingseeker Framped, Strait of Olafes from Dark Souls 2, and a game I've yet to play, Witcher 3. But here he plays the real King Alant, whom you have to defeat in order to beat the game, but serves as one of those gimme boss, which is really just easy.
You are our first visitor. May you be welcome here. Surely you have seen for yourself the pain and suffering that fills this world. But fight poison with poison. God is merciful, and so created the Old One. The Old One will feed upon our souls and put an end to our tragic realm of existence. You fool! Don't you understand? No one wishes to go on.
There are plenty more voice actors that I wish I could talk about that were amazing, but I'm sure it takes up about the same, if not more time, as me talking about the kind of weapons in the game. Presentation. For its time, I'm sure the players who originally played the game early in its life were blown away by the level of detail and graphics. But as of the making of this video, the game is 11 years old and will continue aging. This title suffers from that early PS3, Xbox 360 aesthetic. What do I mean by that? Well, it's sort of obvious just by looking at most games that came out in the first half of the PS3 and 360 lifespan. They are definitely graphical improvements from the generations of consoles that came before them, and were mind-blowing at that. Just as I've stated previously on my Dead Space Arc video, at this point it is starting to show its age. However, that is not a bad thing. Now that I'm a grown-ass man with disposable income and vast useless knowledge over video games, I have the ability to purchase games that I never had access to and play them for the very first time. To me, a game will always be great as long as it's playable, meaning anything before the NES I will never even attempt due to them being just lackluster, compared to the astounding level of quality that came after the NES generation. Anyways, back to the topic at hand, Demon's Souls. I do have a small complaint, and one of the only ones at that. Whenever you roll into destroyable objects, the game decides it can't handle everything that's going on and decides to drop a few frames, but quickly goes back to its playable frame rate, which is not that bad. All playable environments in the game are vastly different from each other, which brings a diverse-esque to the game, keeping things fresh and different. The Nexus is a realm between the world of reality and the world of death, almost like purgatory in a sense. This is considered your base of operations, as stated earlier in the video. It has a mellow, calming music used to give the player the sense of safety. Sure, its design was somewhat unnecessarily grand, but it's alright for what it is. Bosses were creatively designed, making them all quite varied, as it should be. Felonax, the first boss in the game, is named and designed after Felonax, which is a body of troops or authority figures standing or moving in a closed formation. If you're an Xbox player, you may have seen this in Rise, Son of Rome, launch title for the Xbox One, but I wouldn't know, I never played it. Tower Knight is a huge boss about 2 stories tall, wielding a huge heavy shield. Also keeping him company is an army of crossbow wielding soldiers, readily standing by to shoot the player if they decide to take on the knight before ridding the arena of the crossbowmen. Penetrator is a version of the knight that served under King Alant. He wields a huge sword that, as his name funny enough implies, will penetrate you, most likely taking out the player in one swift blow. King Alant, or better yet False King Alant, is a customized demon created by King Alant in his own image to rule over all demons on the land. He was created through the king's lust for power, as he made a deal with the Old One in order to obtain immense power. There isn't much to say about the armorer spider boss. There isn't really any backstory to it, leaving it completely up to the player to decide and come up with their own lore to its origins. I can easily say this boss was the first one I encountered that gave me trouble due to its consistent endless waves of attack with almost no means for the player to retaliate. Flame Lurker is a demon related to Dragon God. His arena is composed of the entrance to a temple. The Flame Lurker is surrounded by dragon bones, with himself being engulfed in endless flames. Personally, I had a bit of trouble with this guy till I found out through trial and error that he is weak to magic. Dragon God, who resides at the end of the Stonefang Tunnel, is a massive dragon hanging out in a huge area of his own. I love his design and menacing demeanor, but unfortunately the boss itself is kind of too easy, as it's meant to be a stealth battle. Nonetheless, I still think it's great. Fool's Idol is a puppet created by the king, manufactured in the queen's image to give the imprisoned kingdom inhabitants hope. Her arena is composed of benches similar to those you find in churches because you are in a church, as well as pillars typically serves to make it harder to get to her for any blows. She also creates traps on the ground for the player to get stuck, leaving you wide open for attacks from the idol. Maneater is a boss created by the old monk in an attempt to create demons of his own from the prisoners kept in Latria. This fight has 2 different chimeras that attack you at the same time if you don't have enough time to defeat the first one. One of the hardest fights in my opinion. The old monk boss fight hangs out at the top of it all in his personal chamber. It's full of chairs to serve as obstacles to avoid getting hit by his magical attacks. The boss itself works almost like PvP to simulate online play. The Adjudicator is a relatively easy boss. Lore-wise serves as passes the judgment, whether a person is worthy of sacrifice to the storm god. If not, they will meet their demise here as food for it. Not much of a challenge, as all you have to do is stick to its left side and you're basically immortal during the fight. Very easy. Old Hero is a blind legendary hero brought back through the means of the old one to fight the player. He is actually incredibly easy, as you are in fact fighting a blind being. You are able to use the players around you as cover if you so need to, but they aren't necessary. Storm King is a physical manifestation of what the Shadow people used to worship. This is a being in which the heroes that are worthy are sacrificed to. What I really love about this boss fight is that you are able to do it with absolutely no equipment, because as you traverse the arena, you find a weapon that renders the sky and sends a quick slicing projectile towards the Storm King in a badass fashion. Leechmonger is another simple boss, which is a boss made from leeches found in this valley, brought together using a demon soul. If the player decides to stand in whatever nasty liquid is on the floor, they'll have leeches crawling up the players, slowly damaging them over time. The Dirty Colossus is much alike to the Leechmonger, as it's a being formed of all trash and filth that has compiled within the Valley of Defilement. And just like the Leechmonger, it's very easy to defeat as long as you stay close to it, because from further distances he attacks pretty well with his projectiles. And last but not least, the Maiden of Austria occupies the depths of the Valley of Defilement. She has traversed this nasty land in hopes of helping the beings who inhabit this area. She has a unique arena, as it's open to traversal and a bit of exploration, but it's better to head left right as you enter and face off against Garl Vinland, which is her personal bodyguard who serves and protects the maiden. Call me out if I'm wrong on this, but it felt more difficult getting to the bosses than actually fighting them. The game has the player for the most part clueless as to what has transpired in the land of Boletaria, as well as what even is happening as you play along and defeat each and every boss in the game. NPCs give a bit of detail as to what's up, as well as a few item descriptions, but if the player is interested enough, they can piece together the lore behind the tragedy that has befallen the land. The environment itself tells a story as well, as the player makes way through each area. For example, Stockpile Thomas, the person in charge of holding your items for you, tells his sad backstory about losing his wife and child due to the fog scourge and demons roaming free. And in the first area of the game, you find rings on these corpses that belong to his late family that he talked about with you, completing his small story and part of this grand lore-based game. I was inclined to find out what was happening outside of the game by looking up lore on everything and everyone, because I was so invested in the story that the game has to tell. There is so much I would like to continue talking about when it comes to this game, but I prefer to leave it up to you if you'd like to play the game for yourself. Despite the game making me mad as hell in certain areas, I felt persuaded by sheer will to persevere and beat the game. And don't ever get me started on the New Game Plus. This particular title requires a great deal of time to get into, so if you're planning on playing the game, I recommend reserving a good weekend, or if you're ever sick with nothing to do and got a million games in your backlog, with Demon Souls being one of those games, go ahead and play it. Although I do gotta say, this game isn't for everyone. If you are the type of person to want to see quick results, or are impatient, or simply have a busy schedule, then this isn't for you. Unfortunately, this isn't a game that you can just pick up and have a quick session. This does require some time, as stated before. If you are someone who loves the rewarding feeling of accomplishment after something tough and challenging, then this game is right for you. I love the time I spent playing this game and can't wait to play the reimagined remake coming to the PlayStation 5. I really appreciate whomever watched and made it to the end of my video. I hope I shunned some appreciation towards this lesser talked about game in the Souls series. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please show your support, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.